listening to the Terrific Teacherpreneur, a podcast for teachers looking to grow a successful online business. Your host, Alex, was able to transform her Teachers Pay Teachers store from a small side hustle into a profitable full-time business. She now helps other teachers do the same. Listen along for actionable tips and helpful wisdom about business and marketing as a teacherpreneur. Here's your host, Alex.
Hello and welcome to the Terrific Teacherpreneur podcast. A couple of weeks ago, recorded an episode and I was sick and I sounded really terrible. And I said to myself, I'm not going to do this again. I'm going to wait till I'm better before I record episodes. And here I am again, recording episodes with a terrible, sickly voice. But sometimes when inspiration strikes and you get a moment with a house to yourself where you can actually record a podcast episode, you just have to jump into it. So you're going to have to bear with me with the terrible voice this week. So this week, I want to chat about why another seller or another TPT store might be having more success than you, like why their products might sell and yours don't. Now, there are 1 million reasons that someone else could be having more success than you. I'm just going to list a handful of things that can separate one seller from another. You could be in a different niche to someone else. You could have different time commitments. You could be part-time, they could be full-time TPT. You have like more of a busy life, family, lots going on, and they just do TPT and that's kind of their thing. Like time commitments are a big thing. You could be marketing differently to them. Like they could have a thriving email list or a thriving social media or Pinterest or something. Maybe you don't. Like marketing can, make a difference, I suppose, to a certain extent. And of course, there's product listings. They could have better SEO or beautiful covers, thumbnails, previews, descriptions. Like their listings could be better than yours. That's a big factor, I think, that affects sales. And then other things could even be stuff like someone else could have a better infographic design and their products could like just literally be prettier. Like they've got better fonts, clip art, layout, like they make these really gorgeous products, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's a bunch of reasons though why someone else might have more success than you. They could be better at spending their time more wisely. Like, I could go on and on. The sky's the limit here on why someone else might be earning more money than you. But today in this episode, I don't want to be talking about any of that stuff. I'm not going to be talking about your listings, your marketing, your time commitment, like none of it. We are actually going to be talking about the products that you're making. And I'm going to sort of share a made-up example of two sellers, and I'm going to describe the situation to you. And I think you'll by the end of this episode, you'll get what I'm going on about. And I'm going to be talking about how two very similar sellers could have drastically different results based on their products. And I know what you might be thinking, oh, she's going to say that one person's doing like Google Slides and digital and someone else is doing this. Like, nope, I'm not talking about product types. I'm not talking about topics, subject areas, like any of that stuff. I'm not going to say, oh, this person's doing math and this person's doing writing. Like, nope. I'm going to share an example of basically two sellers that could be almost the exact same, still have hugely different results. And this will be one of the reasons why. And I just think it's something that will kind of get you thinking and hopefully a bit more strategic in the way you are creating products and a bit more intentional in your product creation. Like that's the goal of this episode, is for you to go, oh, wow, if I were more intentional and strategic with the products I create, I could be having a lot more success. And so, we're removing all the other stuff and we're just looking at that. So let's dive in. I want you to imagine two different TPT stores. So two different TPT sellers, but they share a lot of similarities. They are both, for example, in the structured literacy niche. Like they sell a lot of science of reading resources. So they're in the exact same niche. And like I said earlier, we're not talking about time commitments or marketing. Like let's just say for the example, they spend the exact same amount of time on TPT. They do the exact same amount of marketing. Like their listings are, just for this example, very similar. They do similar amounts of SEO. Their previews are very similar. Let's just pretend everything is the exact same. And I'm even going to throw in another thing. They have the exact same number of products. They both have 100 products. So in this example, these two stores are so incredibly similar. Like literally everything is the same. I know what you're thinking. Oh, why is one selling more than the other? Like, what's the difference? Tell me. I will get to it. Don't worry. There is going to be one difference between these two sellers. So they both have 100 resources that are about science of reading. It's all the similar sort of stuff. They're making activities for phonics and teaching CVC, and there's lots of different centers and worksheets. Like everything is honestly very, very similar. So I'm trying to get across here. But this is the difference. So we've got seller number 1 and seller number 2. Seller number 1 has 100 resources, but they are all quite cheap. I'm talking $1, $2 a lot of the time. The majority of their store is actually under $5. They have a really small handful of things that are, $5 to $10 or $10 and up. They don't have any bundles. Or they have a really small handful, like a couple of bundles, maybe 2, 3 or 5, 10, but just like a pretty small amount of bundles, really. Like it's very limited there. They're not really that big on product lines. They tend to have completely random resources. They just get an idea one day and they're like, oh, I'm going to make this. And it's just like a standalone random thing. And so most of their store is just completely random ideas, sort of thrown into their store. They tend to just get ideas based on what inspires them. Like, oh, I kind of fancy making a set of centers, and they just do it. There's not a lot of looking at their data or anything like that. They have some freebies, but they are just kind of random things, like maybe it's like one page they kind of just can't really justify charging for, so they just kind of throw it up, or it's like something they made and they're like, oh, this is kind of cool, I'll make it free. It's not that great, it's kind of small, or it's good, I think it might entice people, I'm just going to kind of randomly put this thing up. I just made it one day in my classroom. It's not really relevant to anything else in my store. It's just like this one-off thing, but I'm just going to throw it up. Yep. They also have a lot of products that have been kind of overdone a lot, like they tend to go for, like I said, just things that they want to do, but they haven't really looked in search like what other people are doing. They just kind of like, oh, I fancy making some CVC centers. If you're in this niche, I think you know why I'm saying that, because there's a lot of those. And yeah, the products are just really basic and very simple in their kind of size and substance. And so they've got resources that 2 or 3 pages, maybe really small page counts, 5 pages, 10 pages, quite small. Their price points are, like I said, really low. A lot of resources that we just randomly pick a resource in their store. It's just like $2. It's like 5 pages. And the resources themselves are pretty simple, kind of, it's a worksheet and it's like an activity, and that's kind of it. It's not really a lot of substance to it. Maybe there's not a lot of differentiation or digital stuff or, extra activities. It's just kind of like, well, here's the activity I made for my students. That's just kind of thrown up on TPT. And that is seller number 1. Now, I think if you've listened to a lot of what I've said, you've probably gotten a lot of inference of what I'm kind of hinting at here with some of that stuff, because I probably didn't say it in a super neutral way. But now I'm going to really quickly describe seller number 2, and it's the complete opposite. So their 100 products are nearly most of their store, like the majority of their store is in some kind of product line, and the majority of their store, again, leads to bundles. Not every single resource in your store has to be in a product line or a bundle. I'll make that very clear. But for this person, the majority of their store, you could kind of close your eyes, point to resource, it's probably one of a product line, and it's definitely probably in a bundle somewhere. When they make resources, they very rarely just, pick a fun idea that they've just kind of plucked out of thin air or that they just fancy making. They tend to look at their product statistics quite a lot and go, oh, okay, I'm selling a lot more of these types of worksheets. I'm going to make more of that kind of thing. I tried making these sentence building activities. They didn't really sell. I'm not going to make them anymore. Oh, but I tried this, really great set of decodable text. I was making this sort of type of thing and they sold really well. I'm going to make more of that. So they do a lot of data-driven stuff, and it's very much like making things that they know are actually going to sell, expanding on bestsellers, expanding on things that are doing well for them, and just kind of ditching the stuff that doesn't. They also tend to kind of look at search as well and kind of go oh, that's really saturated, won't bother making that type of thing. They kind of tend to think, hey, this is something that is missing in the market. I can see that nobody else has made this type of decodable activity. So they tend to look at that kind of thing as well. They go for kind of non-saturated products for the most part. They do a little bit of market research before they really commit to making something, and they say, hey, I'm not going to bother making that. There's a million of those on TPT. But hey, I don't see anything for this sound, this vowel sound. I'm not seeing anything for this. I'm not seeing anything that is really helping students with this concept. Anyway, they tend to create freebies that are super purposeful. Every freebie in their store is a sample of a paid resource, and it's often a bestseller or a really great resource. It tends to be like a sample of a product line. It really upsells and leads to product lines, bundles, bestsellers. And so when people download those freebies, they are getting pushed pretty heavily to something that they're going to buy. And just in general, the resources that this person makes, like I said, other than just being non-saturated, they are quite unique. They kind of tend to go for things that haven't been done before, and they really make them substantial. So they've got lots of differentiation. Maybe there's digital components. There's lots of activities included. They have a handful of things in their store that are $2, $3, but they've really, for the most part, kept their entire store over $3. And a couple of things under $5, but really a lot of their store is maybe $5, $6 in the $5 to $10 range. They have a lot of things in the $10 up range. And for the most part, they've got a lot of bundles, $20, $30, $50 bundles. They've even got like these mega bundles that are like 3 figures, $100 bundles, that kind of thing. Really expensive resources. And so for the most part, they have a lot of high earning stuff. And that is the end of my little example. I don't think I really actually need to elaborate much on those things, because I think if you just listen to those last few minutes, I think you know what I'm going to say. But when I talked at the beginning of this episode about how you could be very similar to someone else, that you could look at someone else's story and go, I don't understand why they're making more money than me. We're both in the science of reading of niche. Like, we both have 100 products. You could even check in with that person and say, hey, when did you start TPT? And they start on the exact same day as you. Like, you could be like, what's going on here? You look at their store, you do a little stalk, and you're like, hey, we both have pretty good covers. Like, we both got similar kind of things. Like, everything looks the same. You can see their marketing the same as you. And then you're like, I don't understand, because they've told me that they are making way, way more money than me. I'm making $500 a month, no matter what I do. And this person tells me they make consistently 4 figures. They make like $5,000 a month. Like, what is happening here? How are they making 10 times more than me? And I'm hoping that the little example I just gave you there could be the answer. That might be one of the reasons why someone else might be having more success than you, or why you might not be growing your store in the way you want to. Now, just to recap some of those things, because I shared the example twice with this person doesn't do it, this person does. But I talked about product lines, expensive resources, bundles, data-driven and market-based resource decision-making, purposeful freebies, non-saturated products, and then unique and substantial products. Like, that's the little summary of the things I was talking about. And if you want to take notes on those things, you certainly can, but like, those are the things that I really use as my examples in those 2 stores. And they make a massive difference. We all know that product lines create repeat buyers. We know the simple math that expensive resources make you more money. If you are constantly trying to sell a $1 resource, you're never going to make as much money as Susan, who has a $100 bundle, because you have to sell 100 of your resources to make $100. She only has to sell her bundle once. So expensive resources, like, they just make you more money. That's just undeniable. Bundles are great because they are usually more expensive. So again, it's just like tying into that whole expensive resource thing. The data-driven and market-based, research-based product creation decision stuff is really just, obvious, but it's like, instead of just kind of making things on a whim, and then you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sells, and then like going, I don't understand why it's not selling. Making things that your buyers actually want, looking at your data and saying, oh, hey, this is a bestseller, let's make more of this, or I'm going to stop making this because it doesn't sell anymore. Like, looking at your data is one thing. Looking at the market is another. Going, hey, I'm not going to bother even trying to make that type of resource. Everyone has done that a million times. It's been done to death. But hey, I don't see a lot of this. That's a really big thing. Purposeful freebies we know are good, because when you just like throw random bits of rubbish, like a random 1-page thing, it just doesn't serve you. It just literally does nothing other than provide a nice free worksheet to a teacher, which is great. Obviously, it's very noble, but we all know if you have a purposeful freebie, you can get that person loving your resource and then buying a paid version of it. Like going, oh, hey, I want to buy more from you. I want to see what else I can get. I like this 1 page. I want the rest. One thing I actually didn't add about this is quality freebies are important too. Like, if you make freebies great, that makes people go, oh, wow, I want to buy from you. If you just put up those kind of mediocre freebies, that doesn't do much for you. I talked about products in general being like non-saturated, but also just unique and kind of not overdone. I think that's really important. But the final thing I mentioned was the substantial products. And this ties into the whole expensive resource thing. But if you are putting up a resource that's like 2 pages or just like 1 activity or whatever, like, it's not as enticing to buyers, and it's not going to be as money making for you because you can't charge much for it. So you're limiting your profit there. Going for really substantial things is always going to make a big difference. An example would be that seller number 1 has a 2-page resource that they're charging $1.50 for. It's just like, it's one little activity. It's great. It might sell. It could be a bestseller even, but there's just such a limit to how much you can make from that. Whereas seller number 2 could have a 30-page resource, like full of all these activities, and they're obviously able to charge many dollars more. People are going to be drawn to that because they're like, oh, wow, I can use that all month in my centers. Like, it gets more purchases just because it's more time saving and more helpful. But of course, when they do sell it, that seller makes more money because they simply have a more expensive resource. So substantial resources just really tie in well to expensive resources and that benefit there. But yeah, that is kind of the end of my little rant about intentional product creation and strategic product creation in your store. Hoping that this has given you something to think about. Maybe you heard one or two of the things I mentioned and thought, oh, that's me, I do that, or I don't do that. And yeah, like just as a little summary, I would look at that stuff I've talked about and have a little look at your store and sort of say, what things do you think I'm missing? Like basically listening to that example of seller one versus seller number two, sort of asking yourself, who am I more like? And if you're finding that you are more like seller number one in a lot of areas, like that's something that you can improve. So you go, okay, Alex was talking about product lines and bundles and expensive resources. And yeah, the reality is I don't have a lot of product lines. I don't have a lot of bundles and everything's really cheap in my store. And that might be a big area that you need to address. Or maybe you're a person that listens and thinks, oh, yeah, I'm that person with the crappy freebies. And then you're like, oh, I better improve that area. Or maybe you're someone thinking, yeah, I'm that person that kind of just makes products on a whim. And I actually think I need to put a bit more thought into it and start making those data-driven decisions and market research-based decisions, trying to go for the whole unique, non-saturated product types. And I think that might, appeal to some of you listening. So maybe you got something out of it because there's definitely something here. Now, the final thing I want to say, okay, well, what do you do if you have resonated with some of this and you think, oh, wow, yeah, this is me. Some of that stuff is like describing my store exactly. Or even just describing it in some ways. Because remember, like the examples I give, it's usually not all or nothing. It's very rarely that sellers never, ever have any bundles. It's more just like the majority of what you do. So, for seller number one and seller number two, it might not be that number one never did bundles and seller number two does. It's more that seller number one has, 2% of their store as bundles, whereas seller number two, 10 or 20% of their store as bundles. Like it could be more about the majority or the percentages. One person, the majority of their freebies are quality and purposeful. For one person, the majority of their resources are unique or substantial, or they have more product lines, or just in general, their store has more expensive resources. It's not always black and white. You're probably not going to be listening thinking, I have literally no product lines. It's more that you might think, yeah, maybe I don't have enough. So it's about shifting that balance a little bit and saying, maybe I'm doing things in small amounts and for someone else who's got more success than me, it's because they do more of that thing. Overall, they have more bundles and product lines. They have more expensive resources. They make more decisions that are better for their product creation, etc. Anyway, so what do you do if that's you? What do you do if you've been listening and you think, oh my goodness, how do I fix this? It's not always as simple as when you have a listing issue and you go, oh, my SEO is terrible. You just go in and you fix your SEO. That sometimes feels like something you can physically do on every product in a kind of, it's not easy way, but it's like, hey, I can do that. Once you've already created a product, like it's out there in the world, it's a lot harder to kind of go, whoa, how do I fix this now? I've got 100 resources. They're already made. How do I transform them all so that they're like seller number two? It's a big undertaking. Here are my suggestions for things you can tweak. Okay, so when it comes to product lines, you kind of have to do this as a going forward thing, or maybe I need to make more in future. When it comes to expensive resources, though, again, you can do all these things in the future, like I will make more expensive resources. But a lot of the time you can up the prices on your resources and turn your cheaper resources into more expensive ones. And I have done this. I had a phase where I had this realization, oh my goodness, most of my store is like under $5. And it took me a long time, but I did fix it. And no, this isn't going into your store and just upping every price. Of course, you've got to look at data, and you only ever really should be increasing prices when the conversion dictates that you should. If you've got a 1% conversion, a price increase is going to be a terrible idea. If you've got a 25% conversion, it's probably okay. So yeah, conversions matter here. But the bigger thing really is just to go, we're not looking at data in this example. We're looking at, I simply need my resources to be more expensive, and I need a lot of them to be more expensive. And that usually involves beefing up the resource. And so that's going into the actual product and updating it and going, how can I add more pages? How can I add more activities? How can I add a digital version, differentiation, like more options here to make it worth charging more for? So that might be a big to-do list you have to create of, okay, these are all the updates I need to do in order to charge more. But, there might be a few things that you can just increase the price on based on conversions. Bundles are a two-part thing. You obviously could just make more bundles in future as a goal, but you can probably bundle what's in your store. A lot of you listening probably have a lot of resources that you just never thought to bundle. And if you just go through it, I'm sure there are things you can put together. Look at your sales report. What are people buying together? Or just use your common sense. Like what's kind of similar? What might people like? There's always things you can put together. And one of the things I've always thought was a really good idea was just making a massive bundle of lots of different things. You think no one's ever going to spend this much money or buy this much stuff. somebody does. You think, should I put all of these resources together into one giant $100 bundle? Who's going to buy that? Someone will, I promise. There's always someone. And even if only ever one person does, that's worth it. $100 is great. So it's, it's not, bundling isn't super time consuming. It's not like creating a product from scratch. Just making the bundle listing is not too hard. So great use of your time. For the data-driven and market-based research stuff, I would just say that's just a thing you need to do in future. When you're next making a product, keep that in mind, what I've said. The purposeful freebie thing is a mixture of two things. Obviously, in future, when you make freebies, keep that in mind. But you can go back and completely overhaul your freebies. You can delete crappy ones. You can add and bulk up and beef up and make your current ones better. And of course, you can make new ones. And then, for just the making products in future that are more unique and non-saturated, that's just keep that in mind when you're next making a product. But the substantial product thing, I kind of already mentioned with the expensive resources. But just making your resources bigger, totally a great thing to do. So have that on your to-do list. Go look at your store right now. Go and filter by the price ranges. Have a look at your under $5 section or whatever, or price from lowest to highest. Do the sorting feature where you're sorting your resources from lowest to highest and go, okay, I've got a whole page here, 20 resources are all $1. This is not making me any money. How can I fix up these resources and get them so that they are now worth charging $2 or $3? Sometimes you just put it up a little bit by 50 cents or $1. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount. You could obviously do a complete overhaul of the listing though, a resource, and you can actually probably turn it from a $1 resource to a $3, $4 one if you wanted. There's always something you can do to a resource, but I would put that down as a thing to do. But anyway, I really, really hope that this has helped you. The simple reality is that a lot of the money we make on TPT, on a seller-to-seller basis, is we have a handful of bestsellers that do well. And I actually think a lot of the things I've described in this episode really do tend to apply to those bestsellers. And people's stores in general, your overall success is kind of impacted by what you have in your store as a whole. And I think all those things I've mentioned they make a really huge difference. Definitely something to think about. I'll put a link in the show notes as usual to my Facebook group, The Terrific Teacherpreneur, and my Instagram, Terrific Selling Tactics. I don't post as much on my Instagram as much as I used to, but I do story on there. But a lot of the times I come up with an idea like this, like what I've talked about today. Something will kind of occur to me. Maybe someone will ask a question in the Facebook group, or someone will send me a message on social media, and I'll have a thought basically what I've shared in this episode. And I often throw it up as a post in the group, or I share it on my stories. And so yes, not everything makes it onto the podcast, but I do tend to share wisdom sometimes in those places. So you could really get a golden nugget just on the day-to-day when you open your phone. Definitely worth joining the group and following me on Instagram for those little things. But I hope that you have a terrific day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Terrific Teacherpreneur. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Come back for more actionable tips and helpful wisdom in the next episode with your host, Alex. Until then.